liftoff of Falcon 9.
It's Friday, March 4th at 6:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11:25 p.m. Coordinated Universal Time. You are looking at the Falcon 9 on the SpaceX pad at Launch Complex 40 as it awaits a 6:35 p.m. local time launch. Welcome back to the live webcast of the SpaceX launch of SES-9. My name is Lauren Lyons. I'm a mission integration engineer at SpaceX, and I'm standing outside of Mission Control and our company headquarters here in Hawthorne, California. Now today appears to be tugboat free and the winds are cooperating, so thank you for hanging in with us as we make our attempt to put SES-9 in space. To recap, this will be the second launch of the upgraded Falcon 9, and it'll be this rocket's first trip to Geostationary Transfer Orbit. And we're also showing you the first stage landing attempt on the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. We are less than 10 minutes away from liftoff, so between now and then, we're going to give you an update on the road leading to this point, status on the vehicle and payload, and then head right into the countdown for a liftoff at roughly 6:35 p.m.
I'm Michael Hammersley, materials engineer. If you've been following the launch campaign, you know we've had an eventful week. On Sunday, we got to just under the 2-minute mark, and the Air Force range officer called a hold over the countdown net. Shortly thereafter, we learned that a tugboat pulling a barge had moved into the keep out or safety zone set by the Air Force and the Coast Guard in advance of launch. Now, the safety zone is an area that stretches from the shoreline of Cape Canaveral into the Atlantic Ocean. It's determined by the flight path for each mission. The Air Force immediately mobilized a helicopter to try to clear the tugboat from the safety area, but by that point it had already put us in a very difficult position for launch. Our teams estimated we might have one more chance at another launch attempt, given the temperatures of the liquid oxygen, before we'd have to scrub for the day. They gave it their best effort, but ultimately it just wasn't possible, and we ended up with a fairly standard abort just prior to liftoff. We were looking forward to counting down again on Tuesday, but we learned early in the afternoon that the upper altitude winds were outside acceptable limits and only going to get worse, which forced a scrub. We're hoping today's attempt is less eventful and continues to be nothing but clear waters and clear skies. We've been keeping an eye on the upper altitude winds all day, but right now, the rocket, spacecraft, and weather all look to be in great condition, and we're looking forward to liftoff in just a few minutes here.
Upper-level winds have been a recurring theme during this launch campaign. In the hours before launch, the team sends weather balloons up to an altitude of about 60,000 feet to capture wind data. We're not really as worried about the speed of the wind as much as the rate of change, so the weather balloons are looking for how quickly the wind is changing as they ascend. High-speed winds are tolerable when moving in a smooth, consistent pattern, but when the wind changes sharply from one level to the next, that creates extreme wind shear, which can hit the vehicle like a sledgehammer when it's going through supersonic. The last weather balloon went up about an hour before the targeted T-0 time, and from that data, we determined that our best liftoff time would be about 3:35 p.m. Pacific Standard. Again, the purpose of all these pre-launch checks is to ensure we do everything we can on the ground before we start getting the vehicle into space. Once we're off the pad, there's no chance for further troubleshooting, so we need to make sure everything's good for a successful launch. So right now, the winds look good, Falcon 9, the SES look green. Let's do it.
Hello again, I'm John Isberger, Falcon 9 Product Director, and I'm giving you status updates from the mezzanine here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The key message right now, everything is going well for an on-time launch just over 5 minutes and 46 seconds from now from Space Launch Complex 40. But let's take a look at our readiness for launch. On the Falcon 9, we held our standard readiness poll at T-minus 35 minutes, began loading liquid oxygen and kerosene RP-1 propellant onto the Falcon 9. Now the fuel loading of RP-1 kerosene is complete on both the first and second stages. Liquid oxygen loading is still underway on both stages. The good news is it appears we're on track to finish the LOX load on time and with temperatures that are cold enough to meet the conditions that we need for the Merlin engines. Now we're in the launch auto sequence. This is, again, as I've talked about before, where the ground and the flight computers do the synchronized control to make sure that we're ready for launch. Now, as we saw last weekend, the flight computer is in control in the last minute and that determines whether or not to command liftoff from the launch pad. Now, T-minus 10 minutes as usual, we opened the pre-valves, began chilling in the Merlin 1D engines. We're going internal from the external power to the internal Falcon batteries very shortly. Next up, you're going to be seeing the clamp arms opening around the second stage and the strong back recline. Finally, propellant load will wrap up at about T-minus 2 minutes when we finish second stage liquid oxygen loading. On the satellite, the SES and Boeing team are go. They're on internal power. That's their last activity between now and launch. The range is ready to support. All the boats are out of the way. The weather, both ground and upper altitude, where it's been windy all day but dying down, is good. So coming up at T-minus 4 minutes, all systems are go.
We are minutes away from launching SES-9, which is the 9th telecommunications satellite in the SES family, and it's going to be the second one that SpaceX has launched. For those of you joining us for the first time, let's run down the objectives for today's mission. We're going to be dropping SES-9 to GTO, or Geostationary Transfer Orbit, approximately 38,000 kilometers or even higher in altitude. After separating from the second stage, the spacecraft is going to use its onboard chemical and electric propulsion thrusters in order to transfer from GTO into its final geostationary orbit, or GEO as we'll be calling it today. Geostationary orbit is really, really high. In fact, it's 100 times higher than low Earth orbit, which is where we took our last two missions. Now, to get there that high, we're going to need a lot of propellant in the first stage. Now, this means we won't have as much of it as last time when we returned back to the Earth on the drone ship. Now, that's not going to stop us. We're going to use every last drop of that remaining propellant to burn the Falcon 9 engines, to slow the rocket down, and to orient it onto the drone ship. But that means that this landing attempt is going to be a really tough one. But exciting nonetheless, and of course, we're going to have those cameras up and try to show you that live, so be sure to stay with us for that. Today's launch window is 91 minutes long. Now, this is because the Earth is rotating, the final orbit isn't a fixed distance from the launch pad, which means it's easier to get to our desired place in space during that time, during that 91 minutes, than others. If we tried to launch outside of that 91-minute window, we'd run the risk of not having enough propellant to get SES-9 to orbit. If we can't do what we need to do within that window, that means we're just going to pack it up and reattempt launch at another time.
You can see that the strong back has successfully retracted. The first stage is finished loading liquid oxygen, and the second stage, if it hasn't finished loading yet, is just about to finish that loading.
So T-minus 0 is almost upon us. Let's turn it over to the countdown nets and see what's happening on the pad.
T-minus 2 minutes.
Stage 1 fuel bleed complete. Vehicles in self-line.
LD verify go for launch.
We go for launch. Stage step closed out.
C, verify Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup. The flickering computer has control of the vehicle. Stage 2 tanks pressing for flight.
T-minus 30. T-minus 20.
Stage 1 tanks pressing for flight.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0. Liftoff.
ago, you saw the liftoff of the Falcon 9 from Space Launch Complex 40. We're going to follow it from the pad cameras as well as the vehicle cameras. Shortly, you heard T plus 30 seconds. The vehicle was active utilization. We're now controlling the rate that liquid oxygen and fuel are consumed out of the tanks. We want them to burn out evenly, not use up one or the other too much.
Vehicle is supersonic.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
You heard the call out, propulsion is nominal. You hear the chewing in the background. We have passed supersonic. It's dark. The sun set several minutes ago at Cape Canaveral. You didn't get to see the shock wave as the vehicle went supersonic. We've gone through maximum dynamic pressure.
Is chilling in.
That's the greatest aerodynamic stress on the vehicle. We're through that, headed into the upper atmosphere, and headed to the vacuum of space.
And recovery platform has AOS.
AOS is acquisition of signal. That means the drone ship can see the telemetry coming from the Falcon 9. Now currently we're beginning to chill in the second stage engine to get it ready for ignition. Next major event coming up is main engine cutoff and stage separation.
We have MECO 1.
Ignition on the second stage. Yeah, turn it over.
All right, that's a successful second stage burn.
You can hear the shears
starting at that second stage burn. The fairing separation is coming up shortly. The fairing, again, is that carbon fiber composite surrounding an aluminum honeycomb that itself surrounds the satellite. It protects the satellite. That's coming up in about 10 seconds.
We're just waiting for it right here. We should have a good video of the fairing separation. And there it goes. That's fantastic news. You can hear cheers here.
Yeah, it's another major milestone. The reason we get rid of the fairing, of course, is it's a lot of excess mass on the vehicle. So when you get rid of it, you can accelerate the rest of the second stage faster and get the satellite that's on top of the second stage all the way to that geostationary transfer orbit without using quite as much fuel.
So now, while the second stage is accelerating, let's talk a little bit about where it's going right now. So we're going to a geostationary orbit. Now, as you guys probably know, going to orbit is not so much about going straight up, it's just about going really, really fast sideways. And so right now we're going to a geosynchronous orbit. This is a lot higher than a low Earth orbit where the International Space Station is, so it takes a lot more fuel to get there. And in fact, the second stage has to make 3 separate orbital maneuvers, or burn maneuvers, in order to get up there. The first is this first burn you're seeing right now on your screen. Then there'll be about a 17-minute coast period, and then a second burn, which lasts about 45 seconds. So
the main difference between low Earth orbit and geostationary, of course, is that distance. The reason the geostationary in particular is where this satellite is going is because it's going to be staying in the same spot in the sky. That just makes communications with the satellites a little bit easier. In low Earth orbit, you end up making a rotation around the Earth in 90 minutes. The satellite, the International Space Station sees about 16 sunrises and sunsets because it's in that same orbital zone. Geostationary orbit is much further out and it's moving a little bit slower, but angularly it's moving at
about the same speed.
About the same speed as the Earth is rotating.
And so it's actually pretty high up there. It's 36,000 kilometers up in the sky. So you can see this. We have an animation here showing exactly what the second stage is doing. You can see that first stage going back for landing, and then the first burn, which is happening right now. Then a 17-minute coast period, fairing deploys. And then coming up after the coast period is a second burn, really short, only 45 seconds or so. Then the payload separation, and then the satellite itself takes a little while using its own thrusters to get to the final 36,000 geostationary orbit, 36,000 kilometers.
And here's an excellent demonstration. You can see that the satellite staying over that exact same point looks like America in that animation. Of course, this is going to end up over Southeast Asia, but will stay over Southeast Asia for the entirety of its life as long as it stays within that geostationary orbit.
So like we were saying, well, now when you're exactly in the same spot in the sky from the perspective of someone on the ground, it's fantastic for communications equipment. If you have a satellite dish, you want to point at the satellite in order to use it for communications, you just take your dish, point it directly in the sky, and it appears as if it's a stationary star, and you can bounce all your communications right off of it.
The same thing is happening with the drone video. When it's got its sort of communications up to a satellite, if the drone is sort of moving too much, as it tends to when you've got
the vibration during launch tends to shake around the satellite on the drone ship quite a bit.
Yeah, and the vibration during the landing attempt.
We just heard that the first burn of the second stage, the first burn of the first stage is complete. That means the first stage is back on its way to a hopefully successful landing soon. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Stage 1 at your burn ship. Stage 2 at the end of safety.
So like I said, we're just waiting for the, right now the second stage is still doing its first burn maneuver. This is a few minutes long. Coming up soon here, this first stage is going to be coming back down towards that drone ship.
And as we discussed earlier in this webcast, this landing attempt is going to be quite the challenge. We're flying a GTO orbit, and as Tom and Michael just discussed, GTO missions the satellite in a much higher and much further orbit than our last two missions, each of which were to low Earth orbit. Now, this different mission profile makes landing and recovering the first stage significantly more difficult for a few reasons. The first is speed. The first stage will be traveling at a much faster speed than the Orbcom mission, which, as you may remember, was our historic landing back in December. For Orbcom, the first stage was flying away from the pad at about 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers per hour before deploying the second stage and payload and making a U-turn back to the launch site. For SES-9, the stage will be flying away even faster at more like 8,000 or 9,000 kilometers per hour before it separates from the second stage. In order to hit that speed, everyone's clapping. We just heard that prop is nominal on stage 2. That's such good news. So in order to hit that really, really fast speed of 8,000 to 9,000 kilometers per hour, we're going to need a lot of vehicle performance, which the Falcon 9 has plenty of, but high performance requires a lot of propellant. And there won't be as much of it left in the tank as in the stage as we had with low Earth orbit missions. So less propellant means we can't burn the engines as much, and that means slowing the vehicle down. Oh, let's take a look at the drone ship here. Is that the... And the video has frozen out. Oh wait, here we go. Oh, we're seeing something, guys. And we're out. Now, this is something that we expect to see happen when we're landing on the drone ship. That's because as the first stage is coming back, it's shaking. Oh, we're hearing, everyone's cheering. Something good's obviously happened here. But you know, as soon as we get that video, we'll show it to you. Again, this is something that we expect to happen on the drone ship because as the stage is coming back down, it's vibrating the heck out of those cameras. And why don't we just go in and check in on orbit with John Innsbrucker?
It's T plus 9 minutes and 14 seconds, and as you can see on the screen, the upper stage engine has shut down. We are in the low Earth orbit, the parking orbit, the first of 2 burns of the second stage engine. Right now we're waiting to hear a little bit on the orbit. The trajectory looked good as we headed to space, but we're going to wait a little bit to see whether or not the guidance, navigation, and control folks are happy with the orbit that we're in. You also saw just about a minute and a half or so ago, we were waiting to see the first stage come down. We lost the dropout of the signal from the drone ship. We're waiting to hear word on what happened. All we saw was the color bars. We're waiting for somebody to come back and let us know what's happened out there. Part of the difficulty is being over 600 kilometers east of Cape Canaveral. We've got to wait for the shortest ship to connect, and then we'll find out and give you an update a little bit later on. Currently, we are in low Earth orbit. Taking a look here right now, it looks like we've got a good orbit. This is the coast phase that we've entered into now. Now, during this phase, settling valves are going to be pulsing periodically. That's going to settle the fuel and liquid oxygen down into the bottom of the second stage. Now we'll coast, as you heard, for about 17 minutes, and we'll be bringing you the relight then of the second stage engine. At the same time, we're also purging the engine out, getting rid of residuals so that we can continue through the coast phase fairly quiet. The vehicle is just stable as we go through this, doing what we call propellant conditioning, keeping eye on the pressures, making sure the propellant's at the bottom of the stage as we get ready to relight the engine to carry us through the second burn, which moves us into Geostationary Transfer Orbit. Now currently we're looking at telemetry. We've passed beyond the Bermuda ground station that SpaceX has. We'll pick up another ground station in Africa at Gabon. We'll hopefully then have telemetry and video coming back from space to the second stage to understand how we're doing on that burn, and then hopefully spacecraft separation shortly after that. And at the same time, while we're waiting to get to the relight, we'll see if we can get some more word on the first stage landing. But right now, successful launch, we're in orbit, and we're into the coast phase.
So as you heard, it sounds like the second stage and the SES satellite have achieved a good low Earth orbit. This is fantastic news. Like we were saying, this is that we just completed the first of 3 maneuvers, the second being the 17-minute coast period that the stage is now about to coast over.
Yeah, we're excited to hear back about the first stage, whether or not it made it to the drone show. We were watching the exact same video that you did, so we saw all the color bars, and that's when you heard everyone get really sad. We want to know too.
Excited, very excited.
So hopefully we'll learn that in the next few minutes. We're not going to stay online for the actual 17-minute coast. We'll leave you with the animation that you see here. Do pay close attention. You can see that it is moving slowly. Again, the rocket's moving really fast, but the Earth is also really big.
So it appears as if it's moving very slowly. It's actually moving very fast. So stick with us. Don't go anywhere. We will be back just before the second stage, second burn.
Stage 2 RF systems enabled. Expected Gabon AOS in approximately 2 minutes. Acquisition of signal at Gabon. Second stage, power and telemetry is nominal.
Welcome back. The second stage has been coasting for about 15 minutes or so and is just about to start its second burn, which, like we said, is going to take about 45 seconds or so. This is going to get it on its way towards a geostationary orbit. And then once we're in a good orbit with the second stage, we'll have a payload separation, and the spacecraft will take it all the way to 36,000 kilometers from there.
What this burn in particular is going to be doing is increasing apogee in preparation for that move to orbit. What that means is we're going to be moving from a small elliptical orbit around the surface of the Earth. You saw this just a little bit.
It looks like we have a successful ignition of second stage, the second burn. Great news, this is fantastic.
And it's going to be pushing into that larger elliptical orbit that really pushes it into towards that geostationary orbit, and that's the transfer is increasing, the actual increasing of that ellipse.
So like we said, this is only 45 seconds or so. As soon as this burn is done, we're just going to wait for a confirmation that the orbit is good, and then it'll be another 4 to 5 minutes before the payload separation. This is when pyrotechnic bolts around the second stage push the rocket. They separate the second stage from the spacecraft, and it gives it a gentle push to send it off into orbit and do its own thing. So like I said, we're just waiting for that confirmation, and you can see the second stage nozzle glowing hot with those exhaust gases. I don't know if you noticed earlier, but you could actually see the curvature of the Earth below the second stage. And we have just got confirmation of a successful second stage engine shutdown. That's good news. There we go. Good burn. All right.
Successful burn. Excellent.
So one of the things that people might not know about the second stage is exactly how we talk to it. So there's a few parts during this coast period and during the second burn that we lose signal to the second stage, but this is a normal process. It's because the second stage, as it's going around the Earth, goes over the horizon from our ground stations.
So in order to keep on tracking it as it's continuing around, we actually do a handoff between ground station to ground station. If there is no line of sight as we're tracking the second stage, there's simply no communication. Here you can see that the rocket is continuing past the horizon. As it gets too far away, it drops out of signal. This moment in time in the animation is without signal until it picks it up as it just did with Gabon. So we are about over Gabon at the moment, actually, and it will continue to maintain those ground station signals until it gets to the right orbit. Thank you to Jeremy Fields, our ground segment engineer, for contributing the data behind that video.
So now, we've mentioned that the SES-9 spacecraft is a communications satellite. There's actually a lot of really interesting design considerations you have to make when you're designing a spacecraft that's intended to go 36,000 kilometers up in space, basically for decades, or for years and years and years, without any chance of servicing and replacing any parts. This produces a lot of very interesting design decisions.
One of the most important is the thermal control. Satellites like SES-9 are packed with some pretty power-hungry electronics. Like your laptop, electronics heat up when you run power through them. Your laptop has a fan that will blow cool air to cool down the electronics.
It's a luxury that we have air on Earth to cool our electronics down.
Right. That's operating on convection for that heat flow away. In space, you're not able to use convection. There's nothing next to you, so you can't use conduction. For those of you who remember your high school physics, you're operating only on radiation as a way to lose heat.
So, without the benefit of having air to circulate through your electronics, the spacecraft is a communication satellite. It uses a lot of power. It gets pretty hot. You have to specifically design the satellite so that the heat flows away from the sensitive electronics areas. So, it's specially designed radiators in the outside of the spacecraft. These conduct heat from the sensitive parts all the way to the outside, and then radiate that heat away into the blackness of space, so that the sensitive parts of the satellites don't get too hot.
And that radiation is infrared radiation by and large. That's the same sort of heat that you feel when you're standing next to a fire, not when you've got your hand over the top, which is a lot more of a convective heating again.
You can actually see, we had an infrared view of the second stage nozzle a little earlier. You can see that glowing hot radiation heat coming from it. But this is on the satellite, not on our second stage.
We're about 1 minute away from that payload deploy event. Another thing that you have to worry about when you're in the vacuum of space is outgassing in polymers. This is an interesting phenomenon because polymers naturally contain some lighter molecules that will outgas into outer space. This isn't a problem necessarily, except when those lighter molecules can recondense onto sensitive optics. So then you have this film of polymeric material on top of something that you're trying to transmit.
Not good for sensors, sensitive optics, sensitive antennas that are conditional upon the coatings. It's not a great thing for sensitive spacecraft electronics.
Right. You want everything to stay really, really clean. And the last thing that you have to worry about, one of the last things, there's a lot to worry about, is atomic oxygen, which is oxygen normally is O2. In outer space, UV radiation will actually break that up so that you have free atomic oxygens that really like to grab onto your polymers and take bites out of it. Yes, absolutely. We're coming up on that payload deploy event at the moment, so we'll be waiting for confirmation that is, again, that gentle push. I liked it when you described it as sort of a baby bird.
A gentle,
getting pushed out.
Learning to fly. And there it is! This is fantastic news. You just saw on your screen the SES satellite pushing away from the Falcon 9 second stage. So we're not actually done yet, even though the crowd is cheering. The SES satellite still needs to acquire signal to the ground. This means that it establishes radio communication to the SES ground stations. And make sure SES can check in on the satellite and make sure everything's okay. It'll then deploy its solar arrays and spend the next few months getting up to that final geostationary orbit. So this actually takes care of the SpaceX webcast part. Thank you so much for watching this.
Thanks, guys.
So thank you to SES, our customer, the FAA, for providing the launch license, and the Air Force, the 45th Space Wing, for all their range support. And to all of you who logged on to watch this webcast today, thank you. You can follow us on our social media pages. You can see us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter at SpaceX and on Instagram. And if you have interest in coming and working here for us, spacex.com/careers. So keep up with us on our website to find out when our next launch is, and you should really pay attention and don't blink.